His fingers tightened, a brutal vice of bone and cartilage pressing into her throat. Ava Seagal was slammed against the cold, gray metal of the lockers, the smell of rust and cheap paint filling her senses as the world began to blur. The hallway noise warped into a dull roar, the faces of her classmates twisting into indistinct shapes behind the raised screens of their phones. She clawed at his wrist, but it was like pulling at a steel bar. He was choking her, until, before I show you exactly what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The chaos had started just a few minutes earlier in the crowded, echoing halls of Northwood High. The final bell was a starting pistol for chaos. A tidal wave of students flooded the hallways of Northwood High, a cacophony of slamming lockers, squeaking sneakers, and overlapping chatter. In the midst of this turbulent river of bodies moved Ava Seagal. At 18, she navigated the social currents with a quiet focus, her mind already on the charcoal sketches waiting in her portfolio. She carried herself with an artist's introspection, her goal simple: get through the day, get her work done, and stay out of the spotlight her famous last name inevitably cast. She loved her grandfather, but she had no desire to live in the shadow of a legend. She wanted her art to be her identity, not her bloodline. But shadows have a way of attracting unwanted attention. And at Northwood High, the biggest source of that attention was Mason Thorne. He wasn't just a bully. He was an institution of fear, propped up by the influence of his father, a local councilman who treated the town like his personal fiefdom. Mason moved through the school not like a student, but like a predator patrolling his territory. He was tall, built with the lazy muscle of someone who'd never had to truly work for anything, and his face was set in a permanent sneer of entitlement. That afternoon, he and his pack of sycophants were lounging near the main exit when his eyes landed on Ava. She was carefully placing a large drawing portfolio into her locker, her movements precise and gentle. One of Mason's friends nudged him. "Check out the Ice Queen," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Acts like she's better than everyone here." Mason's smirk widened. He saw a target. An easy one. Someone quiet, who never caused trouble. The perfect person to make an example of, to remind everyone who was in charge. "Let's see how composed she is when she can't breathe," Mason said, the cruelty rolling off his tongue with casual ease. His friends snickered, their laughter a hollow, eager sound. He pushed off the wall and swaggered across the hall, his expensive sneakers making no sound on the worn linoleum. Ava was concentrating on securing her locker when a heavy hand slammed the metal door shut, the bang echoing like a gunshot inches from her face. She flinched, spinning around to find Mason Thorne looming over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "What's the rush, princess?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Too good to say hello?" Ava's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I don't have time for this, Mason. Move." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, you'll make time." His hand shot out, slamming the locker next to her head. The crowd around them fell silent, the students forming a nervous, watchful circle. Phones began to emerge from pockets, the small red recording lights blinking like malevolent eyes. "You walk around here with your nose in the air," he spat, leaning closer. "You think that name of yours makes you special? Here, you're nothing unless I say you are." Ava tried to step back, but she was trapped between his body and the lockers. Then, his hand moved from the locker to her throat. It happened so fast, she barely had time to register it. His fingers closed around her neck, squeezing with a shocking, brutal force. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Her hands flew up, clawing desperately at his thick wrist as her airway constricted. A strangled, pathetic noise was all she could manage. Panic exploded in her chest, hot and sharp, as black spots danced in her vision. "Not so tough now, are you?" Mason hissed, his face inches from hers, his breath foul. "Say it. Say you're nobody." Through the haze of oxygen deprivation, her eyes darted past his shoulder. The sea of students was parting. A presence was moving through them, calm and silent, yet displacing the chaos like a ship cutting through water. The whispers reached her first, distorted and faint. No way is that. Her vision tunneled, but she saw him. A tall, broad-shouldered figure in a long leather coat. Relief, powerful and overwhelming, surged through her, giving her a final burst of strength. She tried to form a word, a name. Grandpa. Steven Seagal didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply moved through the parting crowd with a deliberate, unnerving calm that silenced the entire hallway. At 60, he was an imposing figure, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, framing a face that was as unreadable as granite. A heavy, dark brown leather duster hung from his broad shoulders, making him seem more like a figure from an old western than a man standing in a high school. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were sharp, focused, and locked onto the boy whose hands were wrapped around his granddaughter's throat. The shift in the atmosphere was so palpable that Mason felt it before he understood it. The nervous energy of the crowd had changed to awestruck silence. He loosened his grip instinctively, turning his head to see what had captured everyone's attention. He saw a tall old man with a beard staring at him. Recognition dawned, followed by a surge of arrogant defiance. This was his turf, his show. No washed-up movie star was going to steal his spotlight. What's this? Mason barked out a laugh, though it sounded shaky even to his own ears. He released Ava completely, letting her stumble back against the lockers, gasping for air. Your grandpa's here to save you? What's he gonna do? A slow-motion fight scene. Steven stopped a few feet away, his posture relaxed, his hands loose at his sides. The only thing that moved was his gaze, which narrowed with chilling intensity. You have 5 seconds, he said. His voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried through the silent hall with the weight of a judge's sentence. Take your hands off my granddaughter. The direct challenge, delivered without a hint of fear, stoked Mason's ego. He puffed out his chest. Or what, old man? You think your 80s movie tricks work in real life? I'll drop you where you stand. He gestured to the phones, still recording. And the whole world will see it. Steven took one slow, deliberate step forward. The air crackled with tension. You've already lost, he said, his voice flat and certain. The word struck Mason with a disquieting force, a premonition of the humiliation to come. But pride was a powerful poison. It drowned out the warning bells in his head. This was his school, his audience. He wouldn't be disrespected. With a furious roar, Mason made the single greatest mistake of his life. He violently shoved Ava to the side, sending her crashing into a friend who caught her. Then, he turned back to Steven, raising his fists in a clumsy boxer stance. Come on, then, he screamed, his face red with rage. Let's see what you've got. The crowd gasped. Ava cried out, her heart pounding in her chest. And Steven Seagal stepped forward to teach a lesson that would be felt far beyond the walls of Northwood High. The fight, if it could be called that, was over before Mason Thorne threw his first punch. He charged forward, adrenaline and rage fueling a wild, telegraphed haymaker aimed at Steven's head. Without a flicker of wasted motion, Steven's hand came up, not to block the punch, but to meet it, redirecting the force. His fingers wrapped around Mason's wrist. There was a sharp twist, a movement so fluid and economical it was almost invisible. A sickening pop echoed in the silent hallway, followed by Mason's howl of agony as his wrist bent at an unnatural angle. The crowd gasped in unison. Before Mason could even process the pain, Steven stepped into his space. The bully, now disarmed and off balance, tried to throw a desperate kick with his other leg. Steven intercepted it mid-air, hooking his arm under Mason's knee. With a simple, effortless shove, he upended him. Mason tumbled backward, his limbs flailing, and crashed to the hard linoleum floor with a heavy thud that knocked the wind out of him. He lay there for a moment, stunned, the sneer on his face replaced by a mask of shock and pain. Did you see that? Someone whispered, the words trembling with disbelief. He barely moved. Fury and humiliation propelled Mason back to his feet. He clutched his injured wrist, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and rage. Lucky shot, he snarled, spitting a fleck of blood onto the floor. He charged again, leading with his shoulder like a bull. Steven sidestepped the clumsy attack and delivered a single, open palm strike to Mason's chest. It wasn't a punch meant to break bones. It was a precise application of force, a sharp shove that lifted Mason off his feet and sent him flying backward into the row of metal lockers. The resulting clang was deafening, a percussive beat of justice that reverberated through the hall. Students shrieked, a mix of horror and exhilaration. Mason slid down the lockers, groaning, landing in a crumpled heap. The fight was gone from him, replaced by a dawning, terrible understanding. He had picked a fight with a force he couldn't comprehend. Steven stood over him, his expression unchanged. "Real power isn't about causing fear," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge of cold steel. "It's about control." He reached down and effortlessly hauled Mason to his feet, gripping the front of his designer jacket. He then slammed him back against the very same locker he had pinned Ava to, the impact a perfect, brutal echo. Mason's head rattled against the metal. The crowd fell completely silent, watching the raw, unfiltered transfer of dominance. Steven leaned in, his face inches from Mason's, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was meant for everyone to hear. "Apologize to her." Mason's eyes were wide with panic. "What? Apologize? To my granddaughter? Now?" A flicker of his old defiance returned. "No way." Steven's other fist shot out, crashing into the locker just beside Mason's head. The dent it left was a deep, violent punctuation mark. The sound was like a thunderclap. Mason flinched so hard his whole body shook, a terrified whimper escaping his lips. His arrogance shattered into a million pieces. "Say it," Steven commanded. I'm sorry." Mason's voice cracked, high and pathetic. "Louder." "I'm sorry," he screamed, the words echoing down the hallway, a confession of his defeat broadcast to every phone and every witness. "I shouldn't have touched you. I was wrong." Steven held him there for a second longer, letting the humiliation sink in. Then he released his grip. Mason Thorne, the tyrant of Northwood High, crumpled to the floor like a discarded puppet. Steven turned, wrapping a protective arm around Ava's shoulders, and began to guide her away from the scene. Over his shoulder, he delivered the final part of the lesson. "Let this be a warning. Fear makes you a coward. Respect is what makes you a man. Learn the difference." The video didn't just go viral. It detonated across the internet. Before the last students had even left the school parking lot, clips from a dozen different angles were ricocheting across every social media platform. The headlines wrote themselves. "School bully learns karate kid lesson the hard way." "Steven Seagal defends granddaughter in hallway showdown." And "Councilman's son forced to apologize after attack." The story was irresistible, a modern-day fable of justice served cold. The immediate fallout at Northwood High was seismic. The next morning, the principal called an emergency assembly, his face pale and his hands trembling as he stood at the podium. He delivered a weak, pre-written speech about how violence is never the answer and how all parties involved would be held accountable. The students weren't having it. A low murmur of discontent grew into open jeers. "All parties?" a student shouted from the bleachers. "He choked her. We all saw it." Another yelled, "Your zero-tolerance policy is a joke. We have a video." The principal's authority crumbled in real time, rendered obsolete by 100 pocket-sized high-definition truths. The scene at the Thorne household was even more chaotic. Councilman Thorne wasn't angry that his son was a violent bully. He was furious that he was an incompetent one. "Of all the people you could pick a fight with," he raged, pacing his immaculate living room, while Mason sat silently, nursing his sprained wrist and shattered ego. "You didn't just make a fool of yourself. You made a fool of me. Do you have any idea the political damage this has caused?" The conversation wasn't about morality. It was about optics. Mason learned that his father's support was as conditional as his own popularity had been. Meanwhile, the Seagal home was an oasis of calm. That evening, Ava and her grandfather sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the chirping of crickets. "Will he come after me again?" Ava asked, her voice small. Steven shook his head, taking a sip of his tea. "No, He's learned a lesson in fear that will keep him away. The harder lesson, the one about respect, will take him a lifetime to understand, if he ever does. He turned to her, his expression softening. "You were brave today, Ava. You stood your ground." "I was terrified," she admitted, "until I saw you." "Being brave isn't about not being scared," he said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's about facing that fear, and you never have to face it alone. Not while I'm here." Weeks later, Steven returned to Northwood High. This time, it was by official invitation. He stood at the same podium the principal had, but where the principal had commanded no respect, Steven held the entire gymnasium in rapt silence before he even spoke. "I'm not here to talk about fighting," he began, his voice rolling calmly to the furthest corners of the room. "What happened in that hallway was about stopping cruelty. Strength isn't in your fists. It's in your character. It's the courage to protect someone who is being hurt, not the ego to cause the pain." His eyes scanned the crowd, finally landing on Mason, who was slumped in the back row, staring at the floor. "Never mistake fear for respect," Steven concluded, his voice resonating with finality. "One is an illusion that shatters the moment a stronger force appears. The other is earned, and it lasts forever." The gymnasium erupted in a standing ovation. For the first time, Ava, watching from the front row, didn't feel like she was in a legend's shadow. She felt proud to be standing in his light. This story is more than just a moment of a grandfather protecting his granddaughter. It reveals a profound truth. True strength is not found in intimidation or bullying, but in the courage to defend the vulnerable and the integrity to command respect. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes justice needs to be delivered in the most direct way possible to be truly understood. Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone with power abused it and wished someone would step in? What would you have done if you were one of the students in that hallway with your phone out? Do you think true respect can ever be earned through fear, or is it always a temporary illusion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story reminded you of the importance of standing up for what's right, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and unexpected heroes. Share this with someone who needs to see that courage comes in all ages. We read every single comment, and we appreciate every one of you. More stories about bullies getting what they deserve are waiting on your screen right now. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another story you won't want to miss.